Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I couldn't be happier, actually, and I wanted to start before introducing the whole event, introducing Fausto, and introducing Fausto how I met Fausto. I met Fausto before I met most of the people here at IAPP, actually. And I was about to come to London to work here at another university at the time. And there was an online event because it was the pandemic. And I met a brilliant student. And then I became very jealous of Antonio Andreoni and Mariana Mazzucato because they had the pleasure of being supervising Fausto's research. And if I have to say, what struck me at that moment was not only his intellectual curiosity, but also his determination. He knew what he wanted to do. He knew that this was a meaningful and very relevant topic. And you need to think that this was 4 years ago. So it's not that everybody was all the time talking about big tech companies, power concentration, ecosystems. And it has paid out very well, I think. And also the result of the thesis is extraordinary. It's an outstanding piece of work. Fausto has already been awarded prizes for part of the papers that came out from his PhD recently at one of the main critical economics conferences, for instance. He has also been engaging throughout the PhD in policymaking. He's one of the co-authors of the Eurostat report, just to name one of the things that he has contributed to. So I think that we can definitely not consider Fausto as an average PhD student. It would be very hard to all the other PhD students. For me, it has been a pleasure to work side by side with him. I see Fausto as a colleague. I've always seen you like that since I met you. And I couldn't be happier to now be in this privileged position to be chairing this session, not only with Fausto, but also with Mariana, who will be able to kick off the conversation and talk not only about Fausto, but also about IAPP more generally. And just to give you a few quick remarks about today, after Mariana's input remarks, we will listen to Fausto talking about the main findings of his PhD thesis for around 20 minutes. Then we have the pleasure to receive tonight Tommaso Valletti, an expert in competition policy and related topics, that a professor from the LSE that will be giving Imperial. Imperial. Another. It's just that everything that is outside UCL is just like a bit of the same. So then, as I was saying, Tommaso Valletti will give some feedback, comments, remarks, questions. I will also probably jump in with some questions myself, and after giving back the floor to Fausto to comment on all this, you will all have the chance to ask questions, comment on the thesis and the discussions here. Again, a very warm welcome for those of you that are joining now. This is the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, and I haven't said an important thing, which is that I am Cecilia Ricap, Associate Professor in Economics and Head of Research of this institute, and I leave now the floor to Mariana Mazzucato, the Director and also the founder of the Institute.
Great. Thank you so much, Cecilia, and thank you, Tommaso, for coming all the way from Camden, not from South London. Just to let the people in the back know, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seats up front if you want to come closer. So thanks, everyone, for coming. As you know, this is the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. This is the basement, but there's 5 other floors where we're busy at work, including with their PhD students who we put in the attic with the bats. And it's a huge pleasure to have Fausto present his work today, because it's really at the intersection of what we all do here. It's at the intersection of value creation. What's the difference between value creation and value extraction? Something that, as you know, the classical economists thought a lot about. Marx, Smith, Ricardo, they always thought about value in those terms, also being very clear to differentiate profits from rents, right? What is the difference? And I wrote back in 2017 a paper called Digital Feudalism, where I was looking at the kind of rent extraction, that the way that we were choosing to, because all of this is a, how do you say, outcome of choices. There's nothing deterministic in technology. Choosing to allow the kind of data / digital / today artificial intelligence area to evolve was unfortunately becoming more and more about rent seeking. And we'll get to that, I'm sure, in the conversation. But his work really looks at that intersection between value creation, innovation, which is obviously at the center of value creation, but often things pass for innovation, which aren't necessarily innovation. They might just be positioning in a very strategic place precisely to extract rents. And the competition policy angle is central, right? Because we know that competition is needed, so we don't over-rely on monopolists. But even that narrative, the competitiveness narrative, like the innovation narrative, can often get captured. So really looking underneath the table, is this really just about the size of companies? Does breaking up a large company like Google actually solve it? Or do you just end up with a lot of little rent-seeking actors? And the reason I keep coming back to this issue of rents is that it's also quite important to look at the evolution of sectors as opposed to just saying, this is the big, the bad, and the ugly. If you look at what has happened, for example, amongst the big tech companies, including Amazon and Google, we have a project which I know you interacted with Tim O'Reilly and Ilan Strauss, which we called Algorithmic Rents, where we looked at the past 20 years of the evolution of some of these companies, and we then point to a very specific moment in their evolution when some of these problematic practices started to come about. And that's important because otherwise, Shoshana Zuboff's very good book on surveillance capitalism, where she looks at some key problems, where she says, to put it simply, you think you're searching for Google for free, but Google is searching you for free. That practice of that kind of lack of transparency of how the algorithms are designed actually got much worse at a certain point in history. And the question is why? And the fact that it hasn't always been terrible is important from the policy perspective, right? How can we actually help steer? How can we shape competitiveness, shape innovation, shape growth, shape the economy to be more, again, about a genuine value creation and less about rent extraction? So on that note, I think it'd be great if, and I should say that the third pillar that the work connects to is something very dear to the Institute, which is, what are the capabilities? What's the capacity also that governments need in order to not just regulate a sector, but again, to co-create and to shape it? And one of the big issues that we've also talked about is how some of the skills in this sector are being increasingly, if you want, hemorrhaged out of the public sector. And because of these large rents and the companies that can pay university researchers, many of which are now working for Microsoft, or people who used to work in public labs, can we actually govern a process without real knowledge and being at the forefront, at the frontier of the evolution of that sector? And I really hope we come back to that, because the issue of what are the skills needed to govern these processes is, I think, extremely important and very much tied to the work we're doing here with the Public Sector Capability Index, which is a collaboration with Bloomberg Philanthropies that we might have time to look at later. But so thank you so much for, for having chosen the Institute to do your PhD. We can hand over to you to present, and then we'll go right to Tommaso for his insights and then have a conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. It was special. Thank you, Mariana, for the overview as well. And thank you, Tommaso, for being here. It's an honor. Do we have slides here? Let's see. Yeah, okay. So the point of this type of event, PhD in Conversation, is to give an overview a little bit, not just of what my research is about, but how it came to be, like to bring you along my PhD journey a little bit. So this is what I'm going to try to do in these 15 minutes. So my line of inquiry is about power, right? How does power manifest itself in the digital world? And in order to understand where this sort of curiosity came from, I have to go back to before my PhD. So I used to work in a different life. I used to work in the field of competition policy, which deals directly with power. And one of the first cases I worked on was the acquisition of, the acquisition of Fitbit by Google. Fitbit is a smartwatch maker. It makes smartwatches. And so the question was Google allowed to acquire Fitbit, or was it already too powerful? Was there anything wrong? Was there anything unlawful with this acquisition? And it was a fascinating case because it was very different from the traditional old school cases of competition policy where companies were related in distinct categories. There were other, for example, horizontal competitors or related vertically, like maybe at different stages of a supply chain. In the case of the digital world, in digital ecosystems, these all categories kind of blurred. And economic analysis felt like it was walking on virgin land a little bit. The public opinion overall was quite against this case because there was this general sense that Google was already maybe too powerful. Yet the acquisition went through. Only the European Commission imposed some blunt remedies on the fact that, for example, the new entity, which is still Google, Google was not allowed to use data collected through the smartwatches for its ads, or the operating system on the smartwatches had to stay open to third-party developers. These sort of interoperability remedies that were, in this case, relatively weak. Anyways, as a junior and unexperienced analyst, I had the feeling a little bit that we all lacked the language to articulate the problem, right? We didn't know what it was wrong exactly. So that got me thinking, and that's how I started to think in terms of power in digital ecosystems, what is new about it, and why we haven't really managed to pin it down yet. I mean, the backdrop of this is the fact that we are witnessing unprecedented levels of concentration in many ways, and this is mostly driven by technological companies, right? We are seeing the rise of digital giants. And is this a problem? Well, some people say no, because we still have a lot of innovation in many ways when we're now seeing the wave of AI. At the same time, however, there are also clear things to think about, clear trade-offs, like in the issue of digital sovereignty, for example, that we've been talking about in this institute for quite some time, is very huge. Now, all the societies increasingly find themselves reliant on a handful of private corporations located in specific countries. Well, what is the legitimacy of this? Anyways, trying to understand how power manifests itself in the digital realm seems to be a very relevant question. So this is what I decided to do research on. When I first joined IIPP, the first thing that I did as a preliminary research was starting to investigate the business models of all these big techs, in general, large companies at the time, to be fair. So what was the model? What was the business model about? Like I started literally mapping all the areas of the businesses, and one sort of leitmotif that cut across all these companies, I thought, was the notion of complementarity. Complementarity in economics is when the value of one element increases with the availability of another element, and indeed, this is what's going on in the digital world. You don't have single products anymore. You have constellations of products that talk to each other and interoperate and create value collectively. And indeed, this is very much part of the competitive strategy of firms nowadays. This plays very much into how firms compete and try to establish dominance as they try to, for example, get hold of bottlenecks, right? So, to ground this analysis into something a little more concrete, I decided to look at a historical case. I looked at a very famous case. It was the overtake by Microsoft of IBM as the industry leader in the personal computer industry. So to give you some context, the reason why this case is so famous is that in the 1980s, the undisputed industry leader was IBM. It was the main name in town, right? The computer industry at the time was just this bulky, massive machines, but there was this emerging trend of these smaller microcomputers that at the time were kind of snobbed by big players, as they were literally called toys for hobbyists. And then IBM decided to enter the industry because the success of these microcomputers caught their eye, and everyone was sure that IBM would create not only a groundbreaking product, but it would also keep dominating forever, right? So when IBM launched their first computer, the IBM PC 5150 in 1981, indeed that became a hit. The model was so iconic that it became quickly established itself as the main standard. And indeed, all the computers we use today, except Macintosh, still use the same PC architecture that IBM proposed in that product, the IBM PC 5150. However, against the expectations of everyone at the time, because of this product, IBM ended up losing the leadership of the industry. Quickly, a number of competitors emerged that were producing similar computers, using the same complements and using the same partners that IBM did, and they were eroding away the profits. What happened, on the other hand, is that Microsoft took on the leadership of the industry, and suddenly the crown passed from IBM to Microsoft. And how did that happen? It was very strange. So what was crazy about, what was very innovative about this IBM PC was the fact that it featured an open architecture. Not only IBM relied on a number of third parties for its PC. For example, it outsourced the CPU from Intel, the floppy drive from Seagate, the operating system from a startup at the time that nobody knew about. It was called Microsoft. But also consumers could mix and match the various components. And this was innovative. Commentators at the time described the IBM PC as an incomplete package, as an open system that was ready for expansion. And it was truly quite something new. And this is the reason why it created so much value. Suddenly people realized the value of platforms. The IBM PC was not a computer. It was not like any complex product of the time where the large company would produce this tightly integrated system where all the components were tightly controlled by the same company. No, in this case, the IBM PC was a team effort in a way, and this is why it was so powerful and so successful. However, somehow IBM ended up losing out in this industry. So I started kind of trying to map what was happening. What I started doing was collecting data on all the components of the IBM PC and the way they talk to each other. They interoperated with each other. My focus was on the complementarities, as I described earlier. And as I collected this data, I started forming networks, a network that represented the IBM PC. And then suddenly I realized, however, that certain components, the importance of certain components made sense only in light of their role in other computers, in other machines. So I started including other machines too. So it was very hard at some point to find a closure. So I started collecting data basically for the whole personal computer industry. And I ended up with this giant network of like thousands of components produced by over 2,000 firms from 1981 to 1987, which is basically the period when the IBM PC was on the market. And this is just a complementarity map. This maps the interoperability and how different components in the PC industry could interoperate with each other. And so yeah, this was in a way a new tool, something that allowed me to study aspects of industry dynamics and competition that were relatively new compared to what had been done before. Because in competition policy, I don't know how acquainted you are with the field of competition policy, but the unit of analysis is usually the market, right? A market is a group of products that serve the same purpose. So, there is the market for pens, and you consider all the objects that consumers believe to serve the purpose of a pen. However, this substitutability, by definition, rules out complementarities. So it completely misses all the effects that you have between products that belong to different markets, that serve different purposes. And given that digital ecosystems are all about complementarities, this new framing was an interesting way and could potentially shed light on dynamics in a way that hadn't really been done that much before, at least in competition policy. At the ecosystem level, one thing that at ecosystem level, one easy thing that I could see was the fact that the IBM PC as an ecosystem compared to previous traditional ecosystems was incredibly decentralized. It didn't follow a hub and spoke structure where you have like a one central product and all the others around it. No, it was actually very decentralized with multiple heads. However, this was at the ecosystem level. At the product level, my objective was to somehow find ways to identify products that were more powerful because they were so important that they could take down the entire system if they failed, for example. And this is exactly what allowed them to extract more rents. So in my work, I proposed this way to measure bottleneck power, which is exactly this, which measures how important a product is in terms of how many systems rely on that product to function. And bottleneck power had two components. One of them is given by network effect, which is the fact that certain platforms become more valuable as the number of complementaries increase just by means of interoperability. But it also measures intermediary exclusivity or exclusive intermediary, which is how a certain component is crucial for for the rest of the system to work in a way that doesn't have close substitutes, that doesn't have competing nodes. So then in my research, I showed that I studied various potential drivers of rents, and I also showed that this measure of bottleneck power, average bottleneck power held by companies, explains value extraction, gross margins in particular, really well compared to other metrics. Also, interestingly, given that this measure has two components, which is both network effects and this intermediary exclusivity, I could also separate the two and consider them separately to see what was actually important for certain companies to capture so much value. And well, what I found is that while network effects might be a necessary condition to capture value, to extract a lot of profits, they are not a sufficient condition. What really matters is intermediary exclusivity, is the fact that powerful companies not only enjoy network effects because you have, for example, I'll give you an example later, but also those effects are exclusive. So the reason why, I don't know, we're all on Twitter or X, even though nobody really likes it anymore, is not just that all your friends and colleagues are on Twitter, but it's also the fact that it's difficult to port all your friends, all the group of friends, all the list of friends you have onto another platform, and all the content that has been shared so far. It is not just the fact that everyone is there, but the fact that it's difficult to port, to move everyone else onto something else. And that's a subtlety, because many of the efficiency-based arguments with regards to the levels of concentration that we have today are based on network effects. Like people are saying, these platforms are definitely super powerful, but that's because they are so incredibly valuable. Well, it is true that they're valuable, but by no means they need to be so powerful. They could be extremely, like the same amount of value could be produced by making these connections less exclusive. And so this is one aspect of my research. In another aspect that I will not discuss in detail right now, then I study exactly what were the strategies adopted by the various companies to, in fact, accumulate this intermediary exclusivity and also the network effects. What does it mean in terms of company tactics? And then what are the policy implications? How do we deal with power? So this has been pretty much the sort of gists of the last 4 years of my life. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to celebrate the work of Fausto. I had the pleasure of receiving the whole thesis, which is very thick, digitally. So we didn't waste anything for the environment. And as you clearly understood, the work of Fausto is very important. He studies, yes, personal computers in the 80s, but in fact, his way of thinking is very modern, is very actual. It's the problem we're facing these days with the big tech companies. As Fausto said, we struggle as regulators to deal with them. We struggle to foresee the future. We struggle to do interventions. And we struggled in the past, and we still have many problems. As further, a couple of examples. When, I don't know, some years ago, Facebook, the way it was called at the time, bought Instagram. The best way regulators had to analyze that acquisition, which was already worth $1 billion at the time, was to define a relevant market for online camera apps. That was the analysis, very, very, very narrow. When Facebook acquired WhatsApp for $20 billion, they said, well, messages are for free. What's the problem? There is no problem out there. But that's the way we struggle. We want to attach a price. And these are so-called zero-price market. But just because, obviously, monetization comes in other ways, including learning everything about us. So we let go everything. So in the past 25 years, there have been in excess of 1,000 acquisitions by the top 5 big tech. And actually, until recently, zero has ever been blocked. Almost zero has ever been vetted. Okay, so there was Giphy, Facebook Giphy, that was blocked by the CMA in this country, and the European Commission, I think, blocked Amazon Roomba, the electric vacuum cleaner. But these are examples in this ocean of nothing which has happened. So I've become disillusioned. So I was a chief economist of the EU. It's fair to say I was the most progressive chief economist the EU ever had. And we ran 3 cases against Google. We won in court repeatedly. We imposed $10 billion of fines on Google, which for us, it's a hell of a lot of money. But nothing has changed. Okay? And Google makes about $300 billion every year. So you have this one-off penalty. It's the cost of doing business, right? It's a slip on the wrist. And worryingly, it's that nothing changes. Okay? Nothing changes. Behavior doesn't change. Entry in these markets is very difficult. If anything, I'm even more worried about the future because. And the key, and then I will relate to the work of Fausto, is to find these bottlenecks, these choke points, which become essential to extract value and rents. There is a difference between them. And if you think about AI, what you need is chips, monopolized by NVIDIA, 90% market share, compute. There are 3 guys which are offering compute, which is Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. Data, there is only 3-4 companies which can cross-link all our data across platforms, across different things, and also talent. And they've been hoarding. If we wanted to hire a computer scientist, so it's impossible because they command salaries, and a newly graduate can get $500,000, $1 million. There is no regulator that can ever offer that, and no university can offer this kind of salaries. So this is a problem which has external effect on society as a whole. So public purpose, this is this place here. Also, the only chance we have is to instigate a sense of public purpose on the younger generation that may find a sense of a mission in what they do, and then may join the regulators with the right talent which is needed, because otherwise, with all respect for lawyers, it's not enough to have lawyers. You need to have people which are competent. So the problem has been compounded. Even worse is that it's become, a club, not even of billionaires, of trillionaires. These companies, NVIDIA, Microsoft, market capitalization, trillions. I don't know how many zeros. It's almost impossible even to. It's a lot of them. It's a lot of them, and they are all cross-linked. So I invest in your foundation models as long as you buy my compute from me, or as long as you buy the chips from me. So this is creating this self-reinforcing ecosystem of trillionaires, which makes entry and competition and alternatives impossible. And this is worrying. And this is worrying. This goes back to the power, by the way. It's also political power. If you see at the inauguration of President Trump a few months ago, it was evident. No, these guys were were even in front of the Congress. So the image of that, you wouldn't see you would see first Bezos and Musk, etc., and then in the back there would be some elected politician. So that is something that worries me greatly. So Fausto tackles a problem which is fundamental. We don't need to talk about academic stuff, but he does a fundamental academic work bringing from network theory some concepts that you can make operational through this idea of bottleneck power. And as Fausto expressed, bottleneck power is very compelling, it's very intuitive. So what's the value of an iPhone? The value of an iPhone depends on the number of apps that have been developed for the iPhone. So it's the complementarity, it's the number of links, the number of things. But that's not enough. The value to Apple is the fact that they are the only app store. So every single developer goes through the app store, and they are taxed. So some people call it the Apple tax. 30% of the value created by the app developer every time you download an app goes to. So that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. So these are the rent extraction, which has become also the center point of the recent book of Yanis Varoufakis, which has stolen the idea from Mariana a few years back. And the book is called Techno-Feudalism, not digital, but Techno-Feudalism. And Yanis there is basically making an analogy with the feudal landlords. So every activity has to go through the land. So if you were a peasant, you had to pay a rent for access to that. And now this is the cloud is the new land, the digital cloud, and then to have access, so they can extract any rent they want for access to our attention. Again, the work of Mariana and others on that, because that's the only way. So we spend too much time on these things, but that's the way it is. They are designed to get our attention all the time, and this rent is extracted in various forms. I disagree with Varoufakis in two fundamental respects, though. He says this is the end of capitalism. This is a new form, and I think this is instead just the manifestation of capitalism when it is. I mean, there is no competition, unregulated. This is the natural tendency of what capitalism does. The other thing where I disagree fundamentally is that he says these are, passive landlords, lazy landlords, he defines them. These guys are making a lot of investment. So they're not lazy, they're very active. I think they're not making investment in the interest of society. Obviously, they're led by their own business interest. That's a different thing, but they're definitely not lazy. They're very active, they're extremely active. So Fausto brings in this idea of the bottleneck power, which you can measure, which is, in a sense, I mean, I will push you. I will push you to become even more extreme. The criticism that we made to the economists like me, that we tried and failed to regulate and tame the big digital giants, was that we were always trying to measure something, price effects, variety effect, choice in the Google cases, Android cases, Iran, etc. But you are proposing essentially another metric, which is a compelling one, it's a useful one, so it can give you a nice mapping, but it's still a metric in a situation where resources are very asymmetrically distributed. So every time we were running cases against these companies, we had an army of consultants, an army of lawyers against us, that they would come with the best professors, the best people, etc., to, once you measure something, you would expect somebody to come back and say, no, you didn't measure it in the right way. So sometimes there should be a more fundamental approach how to do that. So very structured. So I've become a structuralist, which is not what economists typically are, because that's the only way. Simple rules, which are implementable, which are manageable by authorities with limited resources. We have to think that things have to be, actionable somehow. So complexity is great for academic papers, and that's what we should do. So we should push the frontier of academic research in that direction. But when it comes to the policy implementation, we have to also give some instrument to regulators that they can handle with limited resources. And you have to think about that, I suppose. But I will stop here, and then we can continue later. Thanks a lot.
I may as well just quickly respond to this, and I think that you're perfectly right with regards to the point on limited resources. However, I do think that competition authorities end up using a lot of resources in terms of data requirements, and the type of analysis they do is not necessarily less complex than a more updated sort of analysis. Defining a relevant market requires type of data that is non-trivial at all, right? Like all the data you need on substitutability, et cetera, et cetera. Complexity-based measures don't necessarily require that. In certain ways, they will be a little lighter. So it's true anyways that we should be careful about giving too much homeworks to competition authorities that are already burdened. I wonder whether there's still a point in strengthening the ability of seeing power. They say that seeing is a precondition for being in control of something. So walking in the dark is not going to necessarily help. But yeah, that's just a thought.
Can I just add something just to pick up on something? Oh, sorry. Maybe you could just expand more, just because I don't know if it was explained enough, and I think it's central. I remember I was once unfortunately, in Davos, and what was her name who wrote Lean In Facebook? Sherry something? That's it. Wait, what's her first name? Sheryl Sandberg, exactly. She organized a meeting that was pretty absurd. There was Nick Clegg, as you remember, he used to be a deputy prime minister there, who then went to Facebook to be basically, well, no comment, working for Facebook with all his great knowledge of how policy works. And it was all about, and Tony Blair was there. It was a very interesting room. There was foundations, like the Carnegie Mellon Foundation, and it was a very strange, almost therapy session for Facebook, trying to hear what the counter arguments might be. But the way that Sheryl actually opened up was to say exactly what, I can't remember which one of you, which is the actual size of the market share which we have in any of these subcomponents, and they gave the camera, the photo side, is minimal, right? And so, I mean, that seems a pretty obvious way in which this research could also help competition authorities even just do the most basic thing, which is to show both the network effects between all these different components, but also these bottleneck effects, right? So maybe you could just say something more about these sub-markets and how your work could help, basically provide a much more holistic understanding of these two different effects in the way that those same companies are using, like in that kind of almost ridiculous session, because it was obvious that was, like she literally said, consider all the photographs that people are taking out there, even with your Nikon and your Canons, that's the real market. And so we're just this, minimal. So this sub-market issue. But also coming back to we wrote a paper before the whole digital rents paper, which was called Mapping Modern Economic Rents. And we said land, finance, patents, and how they're used by the pharmaceutical industry. And then we ended with the algorithms. And if you could just say something maybe on how this work could also help us understand some of the rents in terms of how intellectual property rights are actually structured. Because of course, that the way that the large pharmaceutical companies have also extracted rents is how the patents themselves are governed, right? They're really wide, they're really strong, they're hard to license, they're increasingly upstream. So what's being licensed are the tools for research. And these bottlenecks that are then created, can this research also help us better understand some more classic rent seeking, like with patents?
What I will do for the sake of time is add you a few more questions now from myself. So maybe
I'm writing down them.
Yeah, exactly. And also because my first point is very much connected to what Mariana was saying. And basically the question would be, in the end, is it about complementarities or bottlenecks? Because if we want to, when you started talking about complementarities, and in your network, there are many, many complementarities. But in the end, the problem is that in some parts of the network, for different things, there is a combination of things. The network effects, there are technical specificities, but there are also economic and political power dynamics playing there. You ended up having a few players in key parts of the network. And what Tommaso was saying about, think, for instance, of today, the AI value chain or ecosystem, you have many bottlenecks. You have NVIDIA, you have TSMC at another part of the network. You also have the big tech companies in the cloud as the space, not only the infrastructure as a service, but also the space where all the digital technologies are produced, exchanged, and consumed, and we can continue. So, and if you also want to translate this to the story of IBM in the 1980s, wasn't just that IBM was trying to create a global value chain and to position itself as the bottleneck in the value chain, and it failed. Because in many cases, if you think of global value chains in general, and this is where the point with what Mariana was saying, I think it makes a lot of sense. Like in the pharmaceutical industry, they have also, the big pharma companies, positioned themselves in the key bottlenecks. And even if the complementarities are not that as strong, they are still as strong, because without them, from going from bench to bed, I mean, and you cannot have the drug approved and so on. So in the end of the day, we have the complementarities everywhere, in part because of the formation of global value chains, the outsourcing and this split into many pieces of the production process. And whether the problem is the fact that complementarities exists, or the fact that for a complexity of reasons, we end up having bottlenecks. And I would say that the problem is not only precisely where I would think that competition and markets authorities have failed the most, is that they still only look at acquisitions and eventually excessive market power. They are not looking at the ecosystem, which leads to a whole other set of dynamics, for instance, to what could be described, continuing with the jargon, financial bottlenecks. The fact that there was just a new paper coming out yesterday by competition experts, from critical economists that are competition experts, that build on part of the work that I've done and other people, showing that it's not only about acquisitions, but it's also about corporate venture capital, for instance. How Google, Amazon, Microsoft end up being the ones that pour money into all the startups in the ecosystem as a way to make them also subordinate and be controlled. And of course, there is the similar dynamics are happening in the public knowledge spaces, like open source, and how these companies also position themselves and create bottlenecks in the open source space by putting part of the pieces of software in open source, in academia. So yeah, so I think that my main question for you would be whether it's about complementarities or bottlenecks, and whether the bottlenecks aren't actually going way beyond the ecosystem as an strictly like market dynamic, or dynamic among many markets. And then I wanted to make a second point that relates to the discussion about, okay, aren't we asking competition and markets authorities too much, too little? Are they responsible? And the first thing to say here is that competition and markets authorities are, of course, crossed by corporate and political power dynamics. And we only need to take a look at what has happened to the CMA here in the UK, and how Starmer, completely blinded by part of his advisors, who were CEOs of Microsoft, Amazon, and so on here in the UK, basically told the CMA that regulation shouldn't stifle innovation. So whatever innovation it comes is good, and it doesn't matter what's the cost of that. We shouldn't regulate these companies. This is the basic message to one of the competition and markets authorities that had made more progress in understanding what the problem was beyond specific markets. And this started happening before Trump, before this second term. And actually, the interplay between corporate and political power in the US, in particular US big tech and US governments, also dates from before the inauguration day. So I think that there, when we think about what's to be done, I would say we also need to understand that it's impossible. The competition and markets authorities have definitely a crucial role to play to identify and sanction and regulate these bottlenecks. But at the same time, there is something else that competition and markets authorities, because they are called competition authorities and so on in most of the world, whereas in the US they are called antitrust, I guess perhaps because of this they forget, which is the idea of a natural monopoly. And natural monopolies emerge, among others, when there are economies of scale, the network effects contribute to that, and so on. So basically, having one company, one organization, we can say more broadly, is more efficient, is better, works better, even for innovation and so on, than having more than one. Does this mean that we should leave Google do whatever it's doing, or Amazon whatever it's doing, and so on? No, clearly not. But this opens a space for thinking of public value, thinking of public goods, and how the states in plural, I think, could position themselves, offering public utilities, international public utilities, digital public goods in the bottlenecks, precisely to have more competition in the other parts of the ecosystem. So I wanted to pick your brain on that as well, Fausto, in terms of connecting the competition and market authority discussion with also the digital sovereignty discussion and the role of the state beyond being a regulator. And again, thanks a lot for the presentation and all the comments.
All right, so the point on market definitions, I think that this is a little bit the value that a network-based approach adds. The fact that while you do need a certain set of assumptions that will create other biases, however, a network-based approach does not require a market definition, and therefore you don't need to say whether Instagram is a social media or a camera or a camera app, as it was initially defined. Here you put everything in it, anyways. You put the whole industry.
Can I just ask you a quick question on that?
Yeah, of course.
However, that could hurt your ability to then regulate it, because one could argue that Facebook in particular is a media company, should be regulated as such. But then the network thing apoliticizes it a bit by just how would you?
No, that is a good point. When it comes to regulation, you have certain activities that certain companies do, and that should qualify them for certain regulation regimes. And maybe regulation could also be ad hoc. Like we know that this company does this, like is problematic, and therefore like there is no when you're deciding whether to regulate a company or not. Usually, the question of whether the company is sufficiently powerful is not as ambiguous as it is in competition. However, when it comes to competition enforcement, and the question is whether a company is indeed sufficiently powerful to intervene or not, then market definition creates political questions. The issue of related to the issue of land and rent extraction and the role of private property. So how is this sort of intermediary exclusivity achieved? One of the takeaways of this research is that what you need to achieve this exclusive role is the control of interfaces. Is the control, like the strategy is not based on the node, on the specific product, but rather on the way the node interacts with the others. And the way this is done is through the institution of private property, whether it is intellectual property, whether it is proprietary code, or proprietary data, or API, application programming interfaces. This is what allowed Microsoft, for example, not to be disintermediated like IBM. This is what allowed Microsoft to self-preference its own system, and by controlling exactly not the operating system, not its software programs, but the APIs between them. And it is that that allows, which is a form of private property, which allows dominance according to this framework at least. And this is why the open source movement and the free software movement, all this very progressive movement that you had in the early days of computing was so powerful because it went exactly in that direction of keeping that source of power, that form of private property, public. Is it complementarities or is it bottlenecks? It is bottlenecks. So complementarities were described, especially in this presentation, as something that characterizes digital ecosystems, because this is how digital ecosystems are defined. However, the truth is that, technically speaking, complementarities are everywhere and have always been everywhere. The idea that the use value of something increases with something else underpins any production process since always. What is different in this case is that while complementarities, broadly speaking, can also include input-output relations, for example, market transactions. In digital ecosystems, you have non-traditionally, you have interactions that don't traditionally qualify as market interactions because maybe they're based on data instead of money. This is why, for example, Jacobidis and his colleagues in sort of key paper defined ecosystems as a bunch of non-generic complementarities, because if the complementarities are more specific, then you don't have market transactions, but you have other forms of interactions. So the problem is not complementarities per se. Complementarities are good, and having a large number of complementarities, I mean, doesn't mean necessarily anything, but if it does mean something, it means that value is being created, because complementarities underpin value creation, at least use value creation. However, what matters is how these complementarities are controlled in ways that form bottlenecks. And of course, bottlenecks are not just these specific versions of bottlenecks. In the case of the research that I've shown, you had networks where the complementarities were interfaces between components. It was the socket, it was an API, it was this. However, the notion of complementarity can be applied on any possible realm. If you were to depict the world, the society as a network, you would have all sorts of levels of networks with different types of complementarities, including financial complementarities. And this is why like some other academics have used network analysis to study financial networks instead. But of course, I think that in order to compare apples with apples, you need to pick a level of analysis and then stick to that. And then, of course, you can maybe transport it to other levels. But yeah, you also need more complicated, annoyingly, more complicated mathematical tools if you want to merge networks that belong to different realms, because then you have to move beyond networks and think in terms of hypergraphs, which is a fascinating field of maths. It's being developed, but one step at a time.
Let's now move, if you want, to some questions from people here in the audience. I guess you'll have many. I see 2, 3 hands. Do you want to start? I guess we will have to. Yeah, that's you.
Okay. My name is Yasser. I'm founder and director of a company, Maqasid Technology. First of all, thank you so much about your presentation. I'm extremely happy today to attend this seminar. Thank you so much about you, because I am focused about your subject. Secondly, I have a question. What's your advice about how can achieve the values in economic in the digital era? Because that is a very big problem. Finally, I have new idea. We can achieve in your institution, cooperation with anyone who is very interested. We can say, project digital values in innovation to public purpose. That's a new idea, project.
Okay, we will gather the questions. So I will pass the mic to Todd. Oh, thank you, Mariana.
Thanks, Fausto. As you know, I'm a big fan of your work, and I did have the chance to read your thesis beforehand. So what I liked in your work that we didn't really talk about today is the strategic element for firms. And I think picking up off Tommaso's question about metrics, I think the way that bottleneck power can shape how firms act can be very relevant to computational analysis, especially from creating theories of harm, et cetera, how companies build their ecosystems to block out competitors by creating these bottlenecks. So can you talk about that?
And then you had a question? Yeah, deep.
Thank you so much. Brilliant. Matteo, King's College. So my question is more going towards the political dimension. So if we had to build this network today with, I don't know, AI or, I don't know, electric vehicles, and we color the dots with a country the product is produced in, we may have like some dots that are produced in China maybe. So, and I'm thinking, okay, what if this tool is in the hand not of the public purpose people, but maybe Peter Thiel? He might see, wow, wait a minute, there's some choke points there that are produced by China. So what I'm saying is that I feel that in Washington, but even in Brussels, some people are thinking about this in a kind of trade-off between competition and security. And some people may say, well, actually, we prefer more concentrated markets if these markets are in the hand of the US instead of China. So how do you see the strategic dimension here? And how is your tool being used? Could be used by, well, the wrong people.
Okay, do you want to start answering these three? And for the next round, I will only take questions from females.
All right, thank you very much for the questions. How do you create value in the digital era? So when the digital technologies first came about, especially I guess the internet, in the early 2000s, it's a beautiful I don't know, historical period in a way, because there was this crazy optimism also related to all the new technologies that were invented, related to the fact that people could interact to an extent that wasn't precedented. They talked about a global village, and in this era of the early internet, beautiful things emerged. I think that maybe my favorite thing of the internet is Wikipedia. I'm a massive fan of Wikipedia, and that came from that period, the early period, and
Now there is Grokipedia now.
and now we have Grokopedia. That is also an incredible symbol. The fact that Elon Musk decided to do an alternative version of Wikipedia. But anyways, a lot of value came from that wave of innovation, and it was value that kind of leveraged the crowds, and it was extremely decentralized, and it was based on on relinquishing control and private ownership over the interfaces, as we discussed before. So I think that this is how value is still created nowadays, and however, what's happening right now is that some companies are reaping the vast majority of the benefits. Then Todd's question, would you mind, do you have a microphone near you? Would you mind clarifying, would you mean like whether the behavior of companies is being shaped by, do you mind clarifying the question a little bit?
Yeah, so this, I think, is one of the most exciting aspects of your research to me. When you are designing a platform, when you're designing an ecosystem, you get to make all these choices. You get to make choices about which APIs are open, which APIs are not open, how they are open, etc., etc. So when companies are making those decisions, how does your work help us analyze why they have made those decisions, to show how they've managed to build ecosystems or whatever in a way that is fundamentally anti-competitive?
Yeah. Now I get it. I think that this work tries to address a little bit that when Microsoft in its early days launched a crusade against the open source community, Ballmer, the CEO at the time, called the open source guys as a cancer. And then suddenly, after like a decade, when with the new CEO Satya Nadella, Microsoft experienced a U-turn with regards to its approach to the open source community. Suddenly, Microsoft was very open to everyone. They were wonderful. They bought GitHub. They were participating in a lot of open source projects. And I feel like with the current frameworks that we have in economics, maybe that's a little cheeky of me to say, but I have the feeling that the only way to explain this with the current language we have, with the current vocabulary we have, is that Microsoft suddenly became good and started doing charity. Whereas I think that understanding how having a better understanding of the strange and subtle trade-offs between the fact that value is created through openness and through the crowds, but then gets appropriated and breeds concentration, that gives you a more cognizant view of the world and what's going on, and also company strategies. For example, the approach of Microsoft towards open source, which effectively immensely benefits Microsoft. And so, okay, what if these tools weren't in the wrong hands? I would like to think that it would be very dangerous, but actually, I must be honest, and I think that policy and parts of academia are stuck to an old set of tools, while the business world is way ahead. So something that I've done quite systematically throughout my PhD is often reading literature from strategy of the firm, management, and what is being taught in business schools that are a little bit less less reliant on the set of rules and assumptions that we have in economics, and they're in a way they're less rigorous. At least less mathematically rigorous, but their qualitative approach allows them to be way closer to reality, way more pragmatic. So even though they might not have this algorithm to measure bottleneck power, they definitely know how value is being created and appropriated. And whenever you, I don't know if you ever came across email leaks. That basically it's a website or it's a blog that publishes the emails between CEOs, often between digital companies, and they often talk about competition and like whether we should acquire Instagram because Instagram is becoming a competitor and we are Facebook. And whenever you read these emails, you realize that they're perfectly aware of what's happening and they act accordingly. They really think in these terms. And these questions were related in a way, Todd's and yours. I also wanted to comment on the trade-off between concentration and security. I think that concentration is like, of course, this is a generalization and it depends what we are talking about. But this concentration of bottleneck power does pose issues of security. It is not that. It's better if this bottleneck power is held by American companies over Chinese so that we are safer. It would be better if these sort of interfaces and these sources of power were diffused and distributed a little bit everywhere. There are two recent examples that show how this concentration can be problematic also in terms of security. One is from 2 weeks ago. One of the servers by Amazon went down. Anyways, it caused major disruptions, and it really showed how reliant we are on Amazon. And wait, Amazon Cloud is only one of three cloud providers. There are way stronger bottlenecks. Well, I always talk about Microsoft, but like, do you remember what happened in August last year? There was this outage, the CrowdStrike. Went down, and for some time, all the computers using Windows, which is pretty much all the computer, like a large share of computers, could not be used, and then therefore airports were not operating, hospitals were not operating. This was huge, and this is just the result of a lot of bottleneck power.
We will give now the floor to Tommaso, who wants to make a comment, and maybe Mariana as well.
A quick remark again, trying to join Matteo and Todd. So when we realized we failed on the regulation ex post using antitrust tools of a digital platform, we decided to enact some ex ante regulations, which is what you have in mind with interconnection, interoperability, etc. But the ultimate proof whether or not this new digital regulation would work was in something that people called fairness by design. So the companies themselves, believing that the regulation was effective, they would start designing open and fair platforms. Now, if you go and talk, it's very difficult actually to talk to engineers and developers within these companies because they have non-disclosed, etc. But if you talk to a real engineer working for the big tech, they've never used this concept in a practice ever. Okay, they said yes, we are being told when there is a legal team coming to us, they say we should say we are doing fairness by design, but it's a legal concept which is repeated by the policy people. Okay, so this hasn't taken any ground. Which is a problem of your regulatory solution, or to rely on interconnection, blah, 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 because the process is delayed. Back to Matteo, your question has an answer. Between 70 and 80% of the current European digital infrastructure is owned by American firms. Okay, this is a current dependency that Europe has. So even if you regulate, which is what we're trying to do, hopefully with some success, but I don't have a great expectation, it will still be owned by 70-80% of American firms. So we need to get into a new framework, and some people are starting to say we will never be able to replace those numbers anytime soon, but we should start to invest in alternatives. So how can you do that? Invest in alternatives. You can do that through public procurement. 15 to 18% of European GDP is spent in public procurement. That's a lot of money. And you can start, and there are legal tools now. You can start saying public procurement of digital stuff by European. So you cannot, we're making mistakes. All our institutions, we rely on Microsoft Teams, on Google Classroom, etc., etc. This is crazy. Mexico, Brazil, they decided to face, temporary trade-offs, costs in the short run. They said the public administration, get out of Microsoft because we cannot keep doing the same. Let's replace with some native content. By the way, Brazil technologically is super advanced, PICs and other things. They have a digital networks, a digital infrastructure that they don't have in many other parts of the world, electronic voting. They are far more advanced than many other countries. And they decided to face, as I said, a short-run cost. They knew it was going to be difficult in the short run, but then that was a stepping stone into creating an alternative. And Mexico did the same. We have to be courageous and do that by European, by native. Which doesn't mean public subsidies. It's not about subsidizing. It's not money coming from God, but giving enough, collecting a sizable demand gives, consortia of European firms. We have a lot of talent. They have the opportunity to step in. It's large enough. They can make investment. Instead, if they're always competing at the margin against the Google, the Microsoft, there is no chance. So we have to do that. Is it coming? I mean, in Europe, there's a movement along that. In the UK, given what you said, Starmer has been completely bought out by the big tech companies. At the CMA, and the current chairman is a former chief executive of Amazon UK. I mean, are they going to regulate the digital platforms? The Eurostack project. I mean, but these are initiatives which we need to nurture. We need to nurture.
The Industrial Strategy Council in this country is chaired by Microsoft or
Yes,
Amazon.
yes, Microsoft. Microsoft is in the
lady.
Industrial Council,
no,
Amazon
I'm done.
in the CMA.
I was actually going to raise procurement, so I'm glad you did it. But procurement is the only way that the startups in the U.S. scale up. So, this whole discussion about national champions and why are they all in the U.S. and not in Europe, it's not really the Draghi report kind of solution. I mean, that is also a big hole. But what you just said is also very important for creating markets. It's through those demand pull that actually Europe, especially in a coordinated versus an uncoordinated way, could actually help some of this kind of digital ecosystem become relevant, because currently it's pretty irrelevant. I wanted to actually come back to something you both raised, and also your point about Wikipedia and loving it so much. So Jimmy Wales is actually often part of our discussions, and he often says, that the reasons he actually created Wikipedia really had a lot to do with public purpose. And he finds it incredibly problematic, and there's a whole kind of movement thinking about this, that actually Wikipedia is one of the main kind of knowledge sources that all the LLM kind of training gets done today. So it's been kind of captured, and it's very problematic. But that should help us understand this concept of rent a bit better. And your critique of Yanis Varoufakis, part of the book, which, as you say, drew on lots of other people's work without citing it. But anyway, just kidding. Which is, it's not about being lazy. It's about capture. And it's not just capture in the old school rents way, where you have a troll under the bridge charging people fees to cross it. You kind of like that financial intermediation kind of type of rent. It's also gaining way in excess of what you've done. Right? The kind of sharing risks and sharing rewards is a way to limit these rents. So if you think about how data is created, every time you click on something, you're creating data. If you think of the early speech recognition technology, which was all done in DARPA, if you think of Wikipedia and the huge service, hence your love for it, that it created, the fact that also now some of these companies that we're talking about have captured this value which was created collectively to make private profits. That is that difference between what you've done and the amount that you gain from what you've done in the context of value being created collectively. It's kind of more advanced, I think, and different way to talk about rents than just saying a bunch of lazy bastards, they're doing nothing and capturing the rents from it. And that then requires, though, that mapping, which also comes to your network effects and kind of complexity theories kind of tools, to actually map who's done what and when and where and why. Like the whole reason I wrote The Entrepreneurial State wasn't just to say it was public money. It was public money in a very specific phase, in the kind of early stage, very high risk, very capital intensive phase of technology development. That's why it's entrepreneurial. You took risks. And the reason I mentioned that skills point in the beginning, which maybe we'll come back to, is that I think today it's the first time in history, actually, that point of, oh, the early speech recognition LLM stuff came out of DARPA. That's no longer true. Because all those super smart people that used to be in NASA, used to be in DARPA, used to be in Stanford, are now working for these 4 companies. And so there is a bit of question, what will be the future evolution of a lot of these technologies, given where this talent currently sits? Coming back, who owns what and why, who is where and why.
So let's open it up back to the floor. Perfect, amazing. Can you share the mic over there? Thank you.
Hi, congratulations, Fausto. It was a pleasure hearing, and I'm excited to read your research. I am Camila. I'm from University of São Paulo in Brazil. I'm doing a visiting research in University of Sussex, and actually I do mostly policy. I know of the professors because of policy. So I would like to focus on this and in the role of the DMA, considering also that Brazilian is trying to advance this. And one of the discourses of promoting a digital market regulation and trying to be convinceful to the legislative is to protect the Brazilian industry, Brazilian tech industry and SMEs. And you mentioned some things related to the role of portability. You also mentioned the role of open source, but the big tech companies are actually not doing a good compliance on this, right? They are complying with the DMA with open source, but for example, Meta AI uses open source, but how can we create alternative in this? So my question would be, what is, you focus mostly on the role of competition authorities, I would think. So what is the role of this ex-ante regulation, and is this sufficient to tackle the issues that you're bringing? My hypothesis is that this tackles the bad side of this. This tackles the how economic power is being misused, but the proactive side, I think that you mentioned now, to create public procurement and to focus on other initiatives such as the Eurostack. Thank you.
Can you pass the mic? I think like over here and also on the back. Yes. We will take a second round. There was already someone there and also someone here up front.
Thank you very much. My name is Maria Jose Lira. I have a master's in sociology. I'm a sociologist. Apologies about that. From Edinburgh. And my question to everyone, including Cecilia as well, that I think it's very, very interesting, is that do you think that further study should address also the value that labor and resources that are being provided, I say in a very euphemistic way, by the global majority, the global south, should be also included in this as part of these networks, because they are offering substantial, if not crucial, resources for everything of this to be a reality. Sorry. So yeah, should we also consider those aspects? Of course, I'm talking from a sociologist perspective, so I apologize about that. But yeah, that's my question. Yeah.
And also here up front.
Hi, thank you so much for your insightful discussion. I'm Haruka, and I'm currently pursuing another MPA program at UCL in a political science department. So my question is a little bit different from different perspective. I'd like to know more about your academic journey. So, for example, how did you choose this IIPP, and then how did you decide
There is no better place. Next question.
How did you, decide to go on a PhD, and then it's been 4 years of your journey, right? And then was your research question changed, or what kind of difficulties you encountered, given that this policy in the data or digital industry is frequently changing, right? And then also I'd like to ask more perspective from supervisor as well, maybe.
Thank you so much. We will, because we don't have a lot of time, I will give also the floor to Nai. We might not have time for another round of questions afterwards, especially if you also want to say a word. And I will also add a thing as well.
So thank you for the fantastic talk. We have some really good questions that came in online. And so this one begins with, in enforcing competition law, in addition to public authorities such as the CMA in the UK, How important do you think the role of private enforcement is? For instance, last week we saw the Competition Appeals Tribunal's judgment in Kent versus Ennis, which ruled that Apple had significantly overcharged customers on app transactions. And there have been similar actions against Apple and Google, amongst others, in the US and Australia, for example, Epic Games. That was one. And then the other one that came in was, could you expand a little bit more on the challenges around attracting digital talent in the public sector to kind of help and overcome these bottlenecks? And so thank you.
Okay, I would suggest that you pick some. What I would do to make sure that we reply to the very relevant from an economic standpoint question that you raise is also relevant from the sociological perspective, from a political perspective and ethical perspective. I wouldn't say like that you should be sorry, the other way around. Absolutely. Like, I think that Fausto's answer could have been that a bit of what he replied to when I mentioned the financial bottlenecks and the academic capture and the capture also of open source, that he was focusing on one part of this power dynamics. But absolutely, if we really want to map the whole process of value creation and extractivisms, and what I would describe as a twin extractivism, where actually the installation of data centers in peripheral countries, one of the things that Brazil is enabling, we need to talk a bit more about Brazil. And I think Brazil is not decoupling from any big tech, the other way around. Brazil is actually, and unfortunately, instead of pursuing part of the great things that they wrote on the AI plan, they are actually moving the public sector data to Amazon Web Services. So I want to know more, but I mean, let's discuss more about Brazil at some other time. But just to continue with the example of Brazil, just for the sake of the example, in Brazil, there is not only a lot of talent and capabilities at the level of the production of the models, but also a lot of people that contribute with their work to tag the data sets, to clean the data sets, and that is part of what is needed in order to have artificial intelligence and the digital economy working. And Brazil, unfortunately, is also having a rise in the installation of data centers. It's the country in Latin America with the largest number of data centers. And I say unfortunately because even the country is actually liberating the zone and giving tax exemptions to companies that will not only pay less taxes to the government, but also will contribute to the extraction of electricity, of water, in particular in areas where Brazil doesn't have sufficient neither electricity nor water. So it will be directly in the detriment of the population with a promise of economic growth that will not deliver because the data centers, once they're installed, they create 50 towards maximum 100 permanent jobs. And of course, most of what it will be needed to install the data centers is imported. So basically, it's a reproduction of the structure of nature extractivism that our countries, I say our because I'm Argentinian, have been exposed to throughout history. But this, in a way, is a twin extractivism because it's precisely through the data centers that these companies concentrate more data, concentrate more knowledge that is produced globally as well. So the data is produced globally, the labor is created globally, the knowledge as well. Because one other thing that is critical and picking up on things that Mariana was saying about appropriation and extraction of rents is that these companies profit not only from technologies that are created by other companies, but also from knowledge that is developed by universities. And although it's true that there is a concentration of talent in the few big tech companies, there are also thousands of collaborations with universities around the world that contribute to creating the LLMs and developing these technologies and don't see a penny out of that. Taxpayers' money, public sector investing, and so on. So definitely we should include all that. Do you want to tackle the DMA questions maybe and all that?
I think she's better than her.
No.
Yeah, also.
Yes, also, but that is, I thought that you would.
Just kidding.
The
more the merrier.
No one single tool would be effective by itself, probably. Regulation is slow, clanking, is not being super effective so far. At the same time, you need a whole toolkit. Now, I only have opinions on this. Well, actually, one of the chapters of the thesis, this one is not public yet, but it exactly tackles the policy implications and it kind of argues for, actually asks the question whether competition policy should go beyond markets. And anyways, there are many aspects to it. There is the antitrust enforcement, there is regulation, and maybe something that we don't talk enough about is the use of public stakes as a way to address power. and that is something that in the West we don't do at all. It's being done a little bit in China, and it's a bit of a blind spot, I think, in the debate. About my
like equity, you mean?
yeah.
Like the U.S. government with Intel, 10%.
But there's not a way to address power.
No, it's a way to reinforce the power coalition.
Exactly.
But just to show that even the U.S. government that advocates for the contrary around the world is using it for its own benefits.
Yeah. But yeah, exactly. But it didn't do it in a way
to get the equity on something you created. So the Trump administration is, how do you say, decimating the Biden industrial strategy, trying to take equity stakes on something that was developed a long time ago. That's different from what China's doing.
So how I chose IIPP, how did my PhD journey go? So I was working after my master. I was in the industry, and I always kind of felt that I wasn't done with studying, especially because I got a glimpse of research through my undergrad dissertation and my master, and I realized that I really liked doing research. I actually applied for a couple of PhDs in economics, and I got fully funded. I got scholarship and everything, but then I decided to reject it, even though I refused their offer. Even though the first time I applied to IIPP, I actually didn't get an offer. So I applied again, and in the end I got it. So it worked out, and so the PhD at IIPP is different from the ordinary PhDs in many ways. So IIPP, in a way, feels like a startup sometimes. So it's a little bit like messy, but also you have a lot going on, a lot of growth. Something that I found amazing in this department is that it actively encourages you to go beyond disciplinary boundaries. So you're actively encouraged to borrow ideas from, in my case, from policy rather than just economics, from the business world, from finance, psychology, philosophy, and that is beautiful. That really feels like doing research in a pure way. And it also kind of lends itself for innovative research. I think that this is why many PhDs here do research that we are all proud of. So yeah, I mean, the first year in particular was the worst year, I would say, because it's when you're doing exploratory research, so you feel really insecure about the feasibility of whatever you want to do, right? So you're just doing a lot of reading, and you don't have, like, your research doesn't have a shape. One of my supervisors, Antonio, actually he had this habit of destroying everything that I tried to build in the first year, at least. I would go to him with something and I would be like, no, look somewhere else. And it was very hard, but also it kind of broadened the base of my research for the following years, and then it became better and better. I think that you addressed the comment and the question about extractivism. Considering the period that I'm looking at, the dynamics were a little bit more circumscribed. Something that I do see happening at the time was the rise of Japan. At the beginning of the period, Japan was just one of many Asian economies trying to carve itself a place in the world. But then throughout that, like from the 1981 to 1987, you really see that by the end of the period, the DRAM market was completely controlled by Japan. And now we don't remember that anymore. But there was a big geopolitical problem in the US. There was something that was, they created a lot of government industry consortia to discuss how to deal with the rise of Japan. And the US really thought that they were losing their edge. A little bit like what happened with other Asian countries later, and then with China. Something that I wanted to add, by the way, Mariana, to the talk on public procurement, something really interesting that the Pentagon used to do when it procured projects from basically the early electronics company, including IBM, they imposed this clause on second sourcing. So basically, if Intel at the time was a startup, it was a small company, not very successful, not particularly good. If Intel wanted to do business with the Department of Defense, they had to actively give their designs to other companies, to basically competitors. And given that nobody had the capacity at the time to do that, because semiconductors were not very famous, Intel literally had workshops and secondment programs to teach, to give capabilities on competitors. One of these competitors is AMD, by the way. That AMD started thanks to second sourcing. And yeah, that is an interesting way of using public procurement. Yeah. Regarding the questions online, I'm trying to remember them, because my handwriting is terrible. So one of them was on private enforcement and the role it plays. I personally don't have much of a view on that. I know that there are many criticisms of that and there are many issues, but I don't know whether, Tommaso, you're able to comment on that a little more. And then what was the second question?
The second one was, could you expand on the challenges of attracting digital talent to the public sector?
Yeah. Okay, I'll be quick. Huge challenges. So something that I think that has developed in the last few years, and I see that in particular here in the UK, is this idea that when you work in the public sector, you got to do charity a little bit. You're doing it not because you're looking for I don't know, not because you want good working conditions, but because you're driven by some sort of higher goal. And this was, I think, implicit a little bit in the policy of, for example, distributing the public sector agencies across the country. That was done by Boris Johnson. And in general, the fact that career progression is, in a way, like there are a lot of barriers, I think, in the UK to career progression in the public sector. So I think that in general, that kind of reflects this old narrative by which value is being created in the private sector, and the public sector should really try to refrain itself. And that is part of a bigger problem that I believe should be addressed if we are to design institutions that are fit for purpose in the 21st century. And you can read a lot about that in Mariana's books.
So just to conclude, I would like to give the mic for 10-15 seconds to each of you, if you want to say a final word, maybe.
I just want to say congratulations to Fausto. It's an amazing work, and I'm very happy to be here. And once again, well done. Fantastico.
Thank you so much.
Yes, let's give everyone a round of applause.
Also to Cecilia, because it was your idea to have these really nice round tables that actually feature the student and get people talking about the work. So thanks also to Cecilia for this innovation in how we do our seminars.
And also, actually, I hope this type of events help you know more about IIPP, not only about the work of those of us that are older, but also of the people. But I included myself as well there, but also about the PhD students, and encourage you also to pursue an academic career, which also sometimes seems to be like charity, but I think that it has a lot of political value and relevance today more than ever. So you're super welcome to join us, or to join us for our Masters in Public Administration as well, which is a critical master's program. I think is unique. And really, we aim to make in a place where we will help you think critically at a time when everyone is outsourcing their capacity to think on an LLM. Thanks for being here, and we have some drinks upstairs also.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.